Welcome to today's Peak Prosper expert interview. I am your host, Scott Raleigh, and I'm so stoked. Today I'm joined by my friend John Beatty. John has climbed to the top of the tallest mountain on every continent, including Mount Everest, but he doesn't take these adventurous feats as something that define him at his core level. We'll be talking about that in more detail today. During the 9-year adventure all over the world, he somehow survived avalanches, pulmonary edema, tribal warfare, and a whole lot of Cliff Bars. John, those Cliff Bars can get nasty after the 10th one. He's a worldwide traveler, and he's explored over 65 countries, written 3 books, and given live presentations to inspire nearly 1 million teens and middle school students. John, welcome to today's show. I'm so stoked to have a conversation with you.
Scott, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very, very excited for this.
Rock on, man. Well, I got to ask, what inspired your journey into self-discovery and ultimately climbing the highest peaks in the world?
Oh, man, those are 2 great questions. So my journey into self-discovery, it was kind of like an exploration of the same reason when somebody goes into a gym, like, I wonder how much is my max of a bench press? Or if somebody is a baseball player, I wonder what the fastest is that I could throw a ball. I wanted to see what is my ultimate peak human potential as a person? How can I best influence others, the world, myself? How can I live in a way that is my ideal self? So that's what it was for my personal peak potential. And then with mountains, those were kind of like the framework of how I discovered what I was best at as a human being.
Mountains are a wonderful metaphor for personal growth and development. I use the analogy of we're on this journey through life, a journey of peaks and valleys, right? Ups and downs.
Yeah. It's like mountains they're a metaphor and they're a tool. It's like every great religious leader went into the wilderness in order to become enlightened. Like the Buddha sought the wilderness in order to get enlightenment. Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Muhammad went into a cave. Even like Greeks and Romans talked about mountains touching the heavens, and like Achilles, went. I think it was who had the wings? Who had the wings that went too high? Was that Achilles?
Oh boy, I don't remember.
Somebody out there listening knows, but you get the point. Like all these stories of religious figures becoming enlightened used the wilderness in some way. So I love that you use peaks and valleys, and I found that to be true of myself as well.
So this adventure that you went on all over the world, climbing the highest peaks on every continent, there had to have been personal peaks and valleys that you experienced during that journey. Can you share with us a little bit about how you navigated the internal journey while you were exploring the highest mountains in the world?
That's such a good question. I'm like smiling in hindsight. For some of the mountains, I was on top of the world, in a great place. Other times I was just totally bankrupt. Like, what am I doing? Why did I spend the last dollar I had on climbing a hump of rocks? This is ridiculous, Other times I was like in the middle of a breakup and just like, crying on top of a mountain. Other times, it's just like, this is the greatest experience ever. And you're with some of the most wonderful people, like climbing with my dad on Kilimanjaro, just like cool. No care in the world other than just being there in awe of everything that the world is and what it has to offer. Like, there have been tragedies and there have been celebrations. And I think that mountains are magnifiers that show you the greatest peaks, literally and metaphorically, and the lowest lows that life has to offer. And so each mountain is like a little mini snapshot of a life that you get to live. You start off excited, like, yeah, let's do this. Come on. Just like a baby pops out and like, and then you kind of like, you learn some things and you settle in and you're like in your adolescence of the climb and you're bright eyed and you're excited and you're like, what's going to happen? And then you reach maturity and you get towards the summit and then you reach your old age and you're on your way down. And then you just realize it's time to go home. And then you say goodbye to your team. You say goodbye to your teammates. And it's a little mini snapshot of life for every single mountain. And I think that's why I find them so beautiful.
John, one of my mentors says, Scott, it's not so much about how you handle yourself and carry yourself on the upside in life, or when things are going really, really well, but how prepared you are to manage the downside. And when, I mean, shit hits the fan, quite literally. I'm curious how during some of those harder moments, emotionally, the breakups, the being quite literally down to your last dollar while on these extremely challenging adventures, were managed for you. I mean, how did you manage your emotions and your mindset, and the thing that can absolutely go amok for us as men, and that is our mind?
Well, I think your mentor is a mentor for a reason, because that's a really wise insight. And my true, honest answer isn't maybe one that you would expect, but how did I manage it? Often poorly, often in hindsight, in a way that I'm not proud of, or I think, oh, I could have done that better, or man, why did I approach that situation that way? And that I'm intending to be inspirational in a way that you don't have to do everything absolutely perfectly. I think that guys get in their own way, and we can have analysis paralysis, and we freeze up when we're, in those low moments, and we get this, we get debilitated. We get stuck in inaction out of worry of not taking the perfect action. And so I didn't do them all perfectly, but I learned from it, and now I can approach similar situations in a better way today. And that is way more valuable than giving some little snippet of, here's exactly how to handle it when you're down to, here are your 3-step Instagram post process when you're doing your last dollar. Or like, if you want to get out of a relationship funk, here's the beautiful quote that somebody that you've never met said. Like, that stuff is that stuff's great, and maybe give you a little like adrenaline shot boost to the arm. But ultimately, it comes down to each of us learning and owning these concepts, which is only done by our own experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a men's coach by trade. That's my profession, but that doesn't make me immune to experiencing, I guess I would just call it the emotional turtle shell from hell, where I go into an emotional, yeah, and you can probably relate to that, where, I mean, at least in my experience, my emotions bring me to a state of analysis paralysis, and I'm unable to actually act upon what I'm currently experiencing. It's like all self-awareness and mindfulness almost shuts off, and I just go into a complete state of tunnel vision.
And maybe to make a really clear analogy, well, the first time you get to some exposure in mountains, you start looking down, you see the height, and you're like, oh my gosh. And it's maybe a few hundred feet. And then that suddenly becomes like, okay, I got this. Like, I recognize the dangers there, but I got this. And then it's like, you're 1,000 feet up and you're going, oh my gosh. And you do it a few more times. All right, I got this. And growth continues that way for us humans too.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of the fact that experience deconditions us from the things that we fear most. And heights are something that many people are afraid of. I think back to a time that I climbed Monkey Face at Smith Rock, somewhere I think both of us have frequented in our careers as climbers. And we had climbed up to the top of Monkey Face, which I think is 300 or 400 feet, and the sunset. And that meant
stout climbing. That's impressive for anybody who doesn't know what this is. That's a stout climb.
and we had a free rappel. I think you're familiar with the free hanging rappel down into the abyss. So I mean, it felt like the abyss because it was pure darkness. And John, I'm curious how did you get into mountaineering and climbing, and what are some of the fears that you overcame as you slowly made your way to the top of the world during your lifetime of climbing?
Man, first kudos on Monkey Face. That's really cool. Anybody who doesn't know what it is, it's like, imagine you put your elbow down on a table and you made a fist. That's the shape of this climb. and to get the fist part of it looks like a monkey, and that's why it's called that. And it's just an epic thing. So you deserve some kudos for getting up that. My climbing journey was started with the Boy Scouts, and somebody said, let's go rappel off of this 180-foot cliff. Let's tie a rope to a big tree up top of the cliff, and let's walk backwards, tying a harness around everything that's important to you as a teenage boy, and then walk backwards off of this cliff. And I'm like, that sounds like a brilliant idea. Let's do it. Well, I'm terrified. And I just like death gripped the rope on the way down, and like probably didn't take more than 3 breaths the entire time rappelling down, just totally terrified. But then I kept doing it. And then I started teaching others how to overcome their fear just with that little thing. And then my buddy says, hey, let's go climb some bigger mountains. And we went up to the Grand Teton, and we didn't have enough money to buy like equipment. So we instead of let's go sleep, and spend a night or two like most people do, and instead of having gear, we said we're going to just get up as fast as we can and back down all in one push, and we're going to kind of like free climb through the hardest parts. So our plan was literally like, if one person falls, all we had was a rope. We just had a rope and 2 harnesses, but we didn't have any gear to actually attach to the rock. So the plan was, if one person falls, the other person jumps over the closest rock they can, so that we kind of like pendulum. And we were just idiots. Like, I can't believe we survived, but we did it, and we made it back down, and we learned from our mistakes. And I was exhausted after a 17 or 19 hour round trip push. Learned from that. Next thing you know, okay, that was cool. Let's try Rainier. Same thing. Didn't make it to the top. Learn from those mistakes. All right, let's go to South America. Didn't make it to the top of the tallest mountain in South America. Failed at it. Huge storm came in. 2 people fell. There was 5 fatalities on the mountain when we were there. Really, really learned from that one. Scared the pants off of me for climbing. Then I go to Denali. Made it up that one. Turns out all these lessons that I had learned from all these different failures came together with the right weather conditions and allowed us a chance to get to the top of Denali. Not without some drama on the team. Learn from some of that drama on the team and take that forward and forward and forward until the next thing I knew, I was on top of the world. Everest, yeah.
So much perseverance. I think that our dreams, and we were just talking about this before we jumped on today's show, how the universe will test our faith and commitment to actually turning our dreams into a reality before we experience that ultimate aim. And I'm curious, when things get hard for you, or you feel like you're just running into that proverbial wall that we experience in endurance sports, and you feel like everything is uphill and you just keep failing and failing and failing, how do you keep going? How do you keep going after it, time and time again, after defeat?
After many of the mountaineering fatalities, I made a choice to go see a therapist and decompress them. And I had made these things about me. I had survivor's guilt. I thought that I had inadvertently somehow caused these deaths, that because they were in my proximity, that I was part of the reason that they passed away, which was logically, I recognize, just foolish, but it felt that way. And I will never forget what a therapist in Hood River, his name is very similar to yours, actually. It's Scott Rauer, Dr. Scott Rauer. He said that if he could recommend 2 things to every person, it would be, number 1, to learn mindfulness. And that's my answer to your question. In order to remove yourself from all these storylines, mindfulness is the key. Now, I was like, okay, what do you want me to like go climb a rock and like start cross-legged floating with my hands in lotus position? Or like, what is this mindfulness garbage? Like, I didn't want anything to do with it. And slowly I learned and discovered that mindfulness is simply removing your core essence from the storyline that you're telling yourself. It's becoming an observer to the story. And that, in my mind, is the key to endurance. That's the key to sticking with it. It's to not get your emotions and your energy wrapped up around the events. It's to look at it and go, almost as though you're playing chess from far away with your life. Like, okay, there's the bishop or there's the rook, and where would be best for those pieces to work together. And if you can step out of being like in the battle and feeling the clashing of all these different stories and components going on in your life, and instead just observe and witness, you can have endless energy throughout the day. It's when we get wrapped up in the stories that we get drained and exhausted and depleted. And that's my answer to your question is learning to be a witness to the events in your life and orchestrate versus be the warrior on the front line.
That's brilliant. I could not have said it any better. I think that so many of us in life, we get stuck on the proverbial hamster wheel, just doing instead of being and observing the things that have brought us to this moment in our life. And for those listening, what are some practices, because I believe mindfulness is a practice. We don't just wake up and decide that we're going to become mindful creatures.
Right.
What are some practices that we can implement to begin becoming more mindful of what we are doing, how we are spending our time, and how we are flowing through this life that we get to experience?
Well, I'm like giggling over here over your concept of the hamster wheel, because that's something that all of us have heard. But like, let's get into the mind of that hamster, okay? Like, go into the vision of the hamster. All it sees is like each rung of that wheel right in front of it, and it is tricked into thinking that that's all there is in the world, right? Like, if you can put yourself in the vision of that hamster, it's just there, like, well, there's a wheel, and I gotta keep like we have the bird's eye view for the hamster. But if you get in the hamster's view, it's totally stuck, because it just doesn't take a moment to stop and think, is there some other thing going on that would be more comfortable, more enjoyable to do? So like, you tell me, like, if you're that hamster, what does that hamster need to do?
Yeah, that's brilliant. We know what we know, and oftentimes we keep doing only that which we know. And in my experience, breaking that hamster wheel cycle is really only done by experiencing things outside of our comfort zone, doing new things. Like, this weekend, I'm going on a solo adventure retreat in my camper. I'm going to Glacier National Park, and I intend on going, zip lining on Sunday on my way home. I've never gone zip lining in my life. So
cool.
These new experiences, I believe, give us a new perspective and a new lens to look through those different hamster wheels that we may be repeating. And as we use this analogy of the hamster wheel, John, would you say there's multiple wheels that we run the same cycle on in different areas of our lives? Or do we get stuck on this one mono wheel, I guess?
I think that the areas of our life that can be wheels for us are, of course, your profession. I'm on that hamster wheel right now, and I'm starting to realize what it's like to slow down. Like, if that hamster slows down and looks around, it might realize, hey, I actually don't need to be spinning this thing after all. I had all my, I'm a professional speaker for 15 years. And when COVID shut down live events, I still was marketing. And I'm like, hey, who's out? I'm still spinning that hamster wheel. Like, who's going to bring me in to speak? And I knew that events weren't happening, and I just couldn't get off that wheel. So profession is one of them. Your body is another one. We're in the same patterns, the same habits for our physical fitness and for our nutritional health. Our relationships are another one. You have the same pattern that you've brought to, if you're in a long-term relationship, to that relationship, or if you have a string of, if you're a serial monogamist, or if you're polygamous, so whatever wherever you're at, you have a wheel that you're on that you're stuck in, and all of us are. Another is your spirituality as another area of life. And let's see, I feel like I'm missing a big component of life, but I usually say there's like 5 key components of life, and those are several of them.
Yeah, I think we hit on the core 4 at the least, though.
Oh, your
And
mind, your education. That's the last one. Is your mental habits.
John, a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about how you're on this 9-year adventure all over the world, climbing mountains, and you hit a point where you're down to your last dollar, maybe your last $100, whatever it may be. Yet you continued to push on. You continued to persevere despite the financial fears associated with your dream. And I speak to so many people who have dreams. Maybe they're dreams of starting a business, or starting a new career, or hiring a personal trainer so they can break their health routine, or something else. Maybe it's traveling the world. But they get stuck in the grips of financial fear and financial uncertainty. And I know I think you have a program of something of the sort that helps people build a game plan to fund their dream. I'm curious, what have you done to fund your dreams? And what kind of insight can you share for our listeners that may have seemingly impossible dreams that are out of their financial reach?
The first is to change your mindset. So if you think that you have a dream that is completely out of your reach, here's how you break that limiting self-belief. You simply ask, 1, has there ever been anything at all that you thought you couldn't afford that then later in life you figured out how to afford? And if the answer is yes, you can repeat that process for whatever the new thing is you're trying for. So if you were 10 years old and there was a basketball that you wanted, or if there was like a set of football pads that you wanted, or if there was and if you figured out how to buy that eventually, then you know that you can overcome your financial limiting beliefs, right? There was a slingshot that I wanted when I was a kid. It was sitting on the shelf for like 2 years at the local sports store. And I was like, someday, and I figured it out. So you have it within you to break that. So that's the first component. The second component is to ask, has anyone else previous to me ever in history been able to afford that thing? And if the answer is yes, so if there's somebody out there who's driving that Maserati, if there's somebody else out there who has built a spacecraft and put their own car into space, if there's somebody else out there who's bought a complex of houses, or that owns 1,000 properties, or who has built a business that you want to run and earns the income you would like, now you have everything that you need. You've broken through this idea that you personally cannot. You've destroyed the idea that you can't extend your financial reach, and you've destroyed the idea that that's impossible for humanity. You're a human. That other person who's done it is a human. There is absolutely no reason that you cannot replicate what that person has done. So the only thing remaining is to figure out what they've done and do it. Then it comes down to whether or not you actually want it. That's it. And that tribunal, that gauntlet of like the task taking, the doing, is where you prove whether or not you want it. So I kind of got like step 1, step 2 on you there without really intending to, but I went down that road. So for the mountains, I remember we were in South America climbing Aconcagua, and we needed donkeys. We needed to hire a donkey crew to carry some of the extra gear because we're going to be on the mountain for 16 minimum days. And like we had 95-pound packs, and we just needed to lighten the load. And we needed 3 donkeys, and we could only afford 1. And I remember like opening our wallets and trying to do currency conversion to pay this like muleteer to give us to loan us one of his donkeys. And we could only come up with enough money for one of them. And literally emptied every cent that we had. And we're just climbing completely broke with no plan of how we'd like buy any food beyond that point, how we'd afford any transportation back home. And it was a little bit of that scuttle your ships. Was his name Cortez? That came to he showed up and he burned the ship so that there was no way back. We're going to make this happen. We're doing this. We're diving in fully, and there's no way back until we succeed. And I think that mindset, especially when it comes to pursuing your masculine essence and going after something that is like your true life purpose, you have to have that scuttle your ships mentality. I'm doing this, do or die. I'm climbing this mountaintop, literal or proverbial, and I'm making it happen.
Yeah, that's profound. I mean, you're talking about going all in, right?
Yeah. It's putting all the chips in the center of the table and looking at your opponent, whoever he or she may be, dead in the eye, and saying, "This, like, all my bets are in. This is 100% it," and not flinching when you look at your opponent in the eye. And of course, I'm not talking about a human opponent. I'm talking about the ultimate goal. It's just saying, I'm coming for you. I've got the cards. I've got the hand that I need. What you got? Come on, world, bring it. What you got?
John, you have created such an inspiring life that many aspire to lead, and many people look up to you as an example. I'm curious how the community, the people that you choose to spend time around, the people that are on your team, have influenced your life, and how you go about choosing the people that you spend time around.
That's an awesome thing to reflect on. I'm pretty private, and the people that I allow into my life are selected very carefully in that, one, we mutually help each other. And if it doesn't go both ways, then it always seems to just not work, you know? Another one is there has to be a level of boundaries between those that stay close. I'm friends with a guy for like 22 years. If you heard the phone ringing a little bit earlier, it was him ringing me up. And like we bump heads because we're both like get things done and do it our way kind of personalities. We bump heads because of that sometimes. And there has to be a level of boundaries and forgiveness on both parties' behalf. So I look for that very intentionally in people. Like, is this person willing to say no? And will they respect my no? And if we accidentally cross the boundaries, is there a level of accountability and forgiveness on one another's behalf? That's critical for a long-term relationship. They have to be fun. If you're not having fun with the person, what's the point? If you can't laugh, if you can't joke, if you can't like get into some belly laugh, eventually I just get bored and I'm like, nah, like this, you're cool, but I'm going to move on. And I look for all those things very, very intentionally, especially in mountaineering partners. And then I suppose technically competent is another one. I won't go, especially in, something as life-threatening as the mountains. I won't go on a mountain with somebody if they don't know what they're doing, and if they won't prove what they're doing, and if they're not willing to turn around, especially, is I suppose another category. If they're not willing to turn their back on a mountain because of safety, I'm not going to go climb with them. So those are some of my rules for finding the right people. But ultimately, I mean, that was very kind of you to say that people like admire the life that I've lived. Ultimately, it's as a result of the people around me that I've been able to learn these lessons, earn this income, go on these trips, do these things that people look up to. I give a lot of credit to others.
John, I think you pointed out something really important that I really want our listeners to pick up on today. And that was the last sentence that you shared there, in that you give a lot of credit to the people that have been a part of your life that have helped you turn your dreams into a reality. And I believe that there is no faster way to fast track our dreams than to surround ourselves with other people who are out there pursuing their impossibles and following in the footsteps of people who have climbed the mountains that we're trying to climb in our own lives. I'm interested to hear maybe about one or two of the people that have come into your life and how they've helped you accomplish your own Everest size goals.
I have like this flash of about a dozen faces that go through my mind. It's hard to zero in on just one. The first one that I just have to give credit for is my parents. I mean, they were certainly nervous for me and doing all these things, but they were from the get-go. I mean, they got me camping in a Volkswagen bus when I was a little kid, so they instilled the sense of adventure in me. Cool. When I was in high school, they let me go to the Caribbean and like join a sailboat instead of my senior year of high school. Like, there's not a lot of parents that would support an adventurous mindset, I think, in the way that they did. And to this day, they're still supportive in every way. So them I just have to give a nod to. As far as like people unrelated to me, Greg Vernovich he hates any sort of attention or publicity. So sorry, Greg. But I'm going to talk you up right now. He was the expedition leader on Everest. And by that, I mean, he runs the entire mountain. And you never hear about his name in the news of the media. He doesn't like seek attention when there's all these drama stories surrounding Everest. He's just the guy who makes it all happen. He organizes the lines to be created every single year, like the route to go up and the safety, the fixed lines, we call them. And he's the guy who is checking in with every climber that's within International Mountain Guides, which is who he works for. And he was incredible at showing me how to complete a giant, daunting task. I mean, I was there thinking, I got to climb Everest. He's there thinking, I got to put 40 people on top of Everest and safely. Like, that's a different level of thinking. So he showed me to accomplish this big major task, you've got to have incredible boundaries, incredible tactical skills. But then he also checked in individually with each climber. And this emotional connection and balance, this emotional connection with each person balanced with the bigger task, that was an incredible insight into the life that I want to live on a larger term. I want to be an excellent practitioner at whatever the thing is that I'm going after, but I also want to be able to stop that completely and check in and emote with each person that I interact with, that I choose to give that time and attention to. Like, I don't want to be the dad or the husband one day who's like killing it at his job and then ignoring my wife and kids. I want to show up fully for them, and I want to go crush it at the job. And I think that's the balance that we all go for. So he taught me that. He was also the expedition leader on Vinson in Antarctica when we climbed. And I just admire the heck out of that guy. And so without even him intending to, just by the way he was and is, he taught me a lot about living. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, you've climbed the highest peak on every continent in the world. And a lot of people think, oh, Everest must be the most challenging. It's the highest mountain in the world. Was that true for you, or was there a different peak on our planet that was far more challenging than Everest?
They were all more challenging in a different way. So Everest is the most emotionally challenging because it doesn't have the hardest individual days. Denali does. So Denali was the physically most challenging. Everest, you're there for 2 months, and to see other people passing away, to see people quitting, to hear people complaining, to have news criticism that is founded in nothing. Like, the news makes Everest out to be like this garbage dump in the Himalayas where like there's just dead bodies that you're just stepping over and over and over, and like that's all it is. It's like it's not that at all. It's just sensationalized media. It's incredibly clean. It gets cleaner every year. And like, people pass away on it, but it's not like a graveyard that you're just walking over bodies like in Game of Thrones battle style. So it's emotion. Anyway, I got on a sidetrack there. It's emotionally difficult. As far as like the hardest for me was that mountain in South America. I took 4 attempts to climb that one. And so to get down there over and over and over and to keep going after it, to keep persisting, trying to get to the top of that mountain, Aconcagua, that was probably like time frame wise. And that's where I got pulmonary edema. So my lungs filled up with fluids. And then I had to wait for that to clear like a year and then come back, and it happens again. That's the one that was length and time duration hardest. Logistically, getting to Russia and combining Kilimanjaro in the same trip and Mont Blanc in the French Alps, like that was logistically the hardest. So they're all hard, just in different aspects and ways.
I as we're speaking right now, I've just picked up a rock that I keep on my desk from Everest Base Camp, and I've never climbed beyond Everest Base Camp. It's more of a trek to the base of the mountain. But just looking up at the towering ice fall that presents itself from base camp is a daunting experience in and of itself. At least it was for me. I can only imagine what it was like to climb through the Khumbu Icefall. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about that experience on Mount Everest?
It's hard to describe unless you've seen it. And here's maybe my best shot at it. If you can imagine a 1,800 foot tall, massively wide waterfall. I mean, like the widest river you've ever seen, and then cascading down in gnarly white water for 1,800 feet, and then freeze that image into ice. That's what the Khumbu Icefall is. It's literally a frozen glacier fall. And these 40 to 100 foot tall blocks of ice create these huge gaps that are called crevasses. And they all come down to this tapered pinpoint at the bottom of them. So if you fall into one of those crevasses, you'll just get eventually crushed by the ice after 3, 4, 5 days of just being in frozen darkness. It's really kind of a grim, terrifying thought of how you'd go if you were to fall in. There are avalanches happening on a daily basis. So it's not like there's just one moment where it's like avalanche and then like it just like it comes out of nowhere. They're happening all the time. And sometimes they're in poorly positioned places for our purposes, and they end up catching climbers, as happened in the 2015, 14 and 15 seasons. There was an earthquake and then there was another big avalanche in each of those seasons. So to go through this thing, you're walking literally on garden ladders, aluminum garden ladders that are strapped together with nylon ropes over these crevasses. You're at risk of avalanches collapsing on you. So taking a quick bird's eye view, you're racing against the sun. We leave at 1 o'clock in the morning so that we're walking in the coldest part of the night. That way, the ground is the most firm. The colder temperatures cause this frozen waterfall to stay still or to be congealed. As the sun warms up, the ice, it becomes less stable. And so as you get towards the end of your day's worth of climbing, the sun rises and that line of sun becomes like this, like you're running from an atomic bomb's explosion exterior. You know when you see people like running away from the explosion of a bomb, you're like trying to beat that sun line. And so if you're going too slow, you're like, we got to pick up the pace. The sun line is coming. And it's literally like when that line hits, everything underneath your feet becomes unstable, and you people fall through these crevasses. The ladders are no longer stable. The bolts that hold those into the ice, they start failing. So you've got to just race against the sun while you're in this 1,800 foot frozen waterfall to get either to the top or the bottom of it. It's a terrifying place. To me, that's what defined Everest, because you have to go through that 7 times total to carry loads up and back down. Then you go get more stuff from back down and you carry it up higher. and you acclimatize by going through this ice fall.
John, what was it like to stand on top of the world? I mean, what did that moment in your life feel like?
You know, when you wake up from a dream and you're like, oh my gosh, that dream was so real. Did that actually just happen? That's what it felt like. It was, I mean, I knew that I was standing there, and I have photos to go back and like double check. Yep, sure was standing on top of Everest. But I was already on my second bottle of oxygen. The second bottle was leaking. And we only get 2 bottles, by the way. So I'm on my last bottle of oxygen.
Wow.
It's running out of air. My hands are so cold that I can barely pull out my camera to take photos. The camera battery dies because the cold saps the battery. So we got 5 photographs. The timestamp from the first one to the last one was 11 minutes. And that's how long I got to spend on top of the world. I'm trying to like remember a speech that I had prepared to film into the camera. You know, I wanted to like give some cool moment of like what this means to me. And like and I can't remember the speech because I'm hypoxic, meaning like my brain has got too low of oxygen. So I like can't remember what I was going to say. I can't get the camera to work. And I want to also enjoy the moment and like be there and be present for that. Like you only get to experience that once or a handful of times in your life. And I'm like, I just want to be here, but I'm also trying to manage all these things. And then my Sherpa, Nuru Gyaltsen Sherpa, one of my heroes in life, he's one I should mention of somebody who's definitely helped out. He's like, okay, very cold. Let's go back down. Great. Let's go back down. I'm like, okay. So we start going back down, and he told me before we went down, he says, careful, down matters most. And he says that because while climbing, most mountaineering deaths happen on the way down. But I've taken that into so many other elements of life. Like when you graduate from high school, that moment is your celebratory top of the world moment. But it's everything that you do after that that will determine whether or not you've earned that graduation ceremony or your time in high school. Once you once you get married, it's the same thing. That is an important moment. You're on top of the world right then. But it's every day that follows and how you act in the follow-up to that ceremony that determines whether or not you've earned that marriage. Down matters most applies to everything in our lives. And it's this concept of, yes, you celebrate, yes, you have this one celebratory achievement, but it's what you do next that actually earns that moment.
So well said. John, you've climbed all of these peaks. I'm really interested to hear about the peak that you're currently climbing in your life or your career or something that you might be training for. I mean, what peak are you after these days in life?
The literal peak is Mount Cook in New Zealand. So that's the actual mountain, but I can't go there until things open up again. So the metaphorical peaks that I'm working on, I started a camper van rental business to make up some income. I had a camper van and now I have 5 and I rent them out. That's a business that I'm working on. A bigger picture, I want to create some organization that teaches environmental sustainability practices for business, for life, for individuals, that is for high school students and college students. We're wrecking our planet. There's no way to get around it. You see that in the fires, you see that in the increased hurricanes, you see that in the flooding. I don't care who you are or what your thoughts are, it's because of humans, period. And I think that there's so much that we could teach young people, a new generation coming up, rather than just picketing and being in protests, which kind of just is noise. How can they become politicians that create action? How can they start businesses that are sustainable or that clean up some of the mess that we've found ourselves to be in? How can we, as individuals, live sustainably? All those practices, I'd like to create an organization that teaches these things.
Wonderful. Hey, John, final question I have for you as we kind of wrap up today's show, and that is, how do you define prosperity?
Hmm. Always catching me with curveballs, Scotty. I define prosperity as having the sense of arrived. And this is something that a concept I learned from my buddy Casper. Casper Power. He's from Switzerland. He lives in South Africa now. And we're sitting on a beach looking out at all these kite surfers in the world's kiteboarding capital, people jumping 100 feet into the sky. And I'm like, I want to get out there. I want to do that. And he says, yeah, John, but you're yearning. I go, of course I'm yearning. I want to do that. And he's like, what would it take for you to sit right here and feel like you've arrived at everywhere you want to have arrived at? He says, that's what I yearn for. And that's what prosperity is to me, to be able to sit in a conversation with you right now and say, I've arrived. This is exactly where I should be. To be able to walk down the beach with my lady's hand in mine and say, I've arrived. This is exactly where I want to be. To be working on my business or creating an organization and say, I've arrived. To have that sensation, that is prosperity.
John, you've shared so much wisdom today. I can't thank you enough for joining me for this conversation. If someone listening would like to learn more about you and your story, maybe even rent a camper van from you, where do they find more information about John Beatty?
Yeah, so johnbeede.com. It's spelled JOHNBEEDE.com. So BEEDE. johnbeede.com is where you can get all information about me. Same thing on social media. I'm at John Beatty everywhere. And for a camper van, you want to go on an adventure, it's vegascampers.com.
Awesome. Well, hey, John, thank you so much again. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope you get outside and enjoy some epic adventures with your life. Peace.
Go get